The illusion of rationality. We like to think of ourselves as rational creatures, people who weigh options, compare outcomes, and choose carefully. It's a comforting belief. It makes us feel in control. But there's a darker truth hiding in plain sight. Most of the time, our decisions are not guided by reason, but by invisible shortcuts and biases that run beneath awareness. What feels like careful thinking is often a story we tell ourselves after the fact. You may have experienced this in the smallest ways. Imagine walking into a store to buy a bottle of wine. You see two bottles side by side, one priced at $15, the other at $30. You may not know anything about wine, but you already lean toward one of them. Why? Because your brain doesn't calculate chemical composition or production methods. Instead, it takes a shortcut. The higher price must mean higher quality. And just like that, without evidence, a decision is made. This is not laziness. It is the way the human brain is built. We live in a world too complex to analyze in full. So the mind cheats. It relies on patterns, quick associations, and emotional impressions. These shortcuts help us move fast, but they come at a cost. We believe we are being rational, while in reality, we are being guided by forces we don't even notice. There is nothing more dangerous than familiarity. When something feels familiar, we mistake it for truth. Psychologists call this the illusion of truth effect. A statement repeated often enough begins to feel real, not because of evidence, but because of exposure. Think of slogans, rumors, or even political claims. The more you hear them, the more natural they sound, until your brain quietly stamps them as credible. The danger is not only in propaganda or advertising, it is in how we judge the world around us. Consider this simple question. Are there more words in English that begin with the letter K, or more words with K as the third letter? Most people immediately think of kangaroo, kitchen, kind. Words starting with K flood the mind. So they confidently say, more words begin with K, but the truth is the opposite. There are far more words with K in the third position. Our error comes not from stupidity, but from the brain's reliance on what comes easily to mind. If it feels easy, it must be true. This illusion is everywhere. When we hear news stories about airplane crashes, we begin to believe flying is dangerous, even though statistically it is far safer than driving. When we recall a vivid story of a lottery winner, we start to overestimate our own chances of winning. The mind equates vividness with probability. Rational? No. But convincing? Absolutely. For centuries, philosophers imagined humans as rational animals. Economics was built on the idea of Homo economics, the perfectly logical decision-maker who weighs costs and benefits with cold precision. But real human beings are nothing like that. A striking example comes from judges deciding parole cases. You might assume justice is impartial, guided only by facts and laws. But researchers studying thousands of rulings discovered a disturbing pattern. Prisoners who appeared before a judge early in the morning were far more likely to be granted parole than those appearing just before lunch. The reason? Decision fatigue. As judges grew tired, their brains defaulted to the safer option, deny parole. Logic didn't vanish, but it was overpowered by the silent push of mental exhaustion. This single example reveals something profound. Rationality is fragile. It is not our default state. It is a limited resource, easily drained, and often replaced by quick impressions or gut feelings. We believe we are weighing evidence, but often we are just leaning on the mental equivalent of autopilot. Why does this illusion matter? Because it shapes our lives more than we dare admit. Think about your daily routine, choosing what to eat, who to trust, where to spend money, even who to love. You may tell yourself that each choice reflects your values and reasoning, but in truth, many are determined by subtle cues you barely notice. Researchers once showed people two photographs of strangers and asked, which person looks more competent? With no background information, people made snap judgments in seconds. Later, those same judgments predicted real-world outcomes, like which candidate actually won elections. The frightening part is not that people guessed correctly, but that voters believed they were making choices based on policies, when in reality, faces and first impressions played a hidden role. Your brain is not lying to you deliberately. It is protecting you, trying to simplify a chaotic world into something manageable. But the simplification creates illusions. We believe we are steering the ship, when in truth, invisible currents are pushing us forward. So here we are, standing at the doorway of our own mind. On one side is the comforting myth, I think therefore I choose. On the other is the unsettling reality. Much of what I call thinking is just reacting. And the gap between those two is where mistakes, biases, and even tragedies unfold. The psychologist Daniel Kahneman, in Thinking, Fast and Slow, described this as living in a room we have occupied all our lives, but never turned on the light. We stumble around, convinced we know where everything is, until someone flips the switch and reveals the furniture arranged differently than we thought. Suddenly, we see the traps, the shortcuts, the hidden doors. That is what this journey is about. Not just learning facts, but facing the uncomfortable truth that the brain is both brilliant and deeply flawed. It saves us and betrays us. It gives us confidence while quietly misleading us. And if we wish to understand ourselves or even begin to make better choices, we must first see through the illusion of rationality. Meet the two systems. Every one of us has two characters living inside the mind. They don't speak out loud, they don't introduce themselves, and yet they shape everything you do. One is quick, automatic, and instinctive. The other is slower, deliberate, and calculating. Psychologists call them System 1 and System 2. But to really understand them, it's better to see them as two personalities, two modes of thinking that take turns steering your life. The fast one. System 1 is always awake. It never stops working. It's the part of your brain that recognizes a friend's face instantly, even across a crowded street. It's the instinct that makes you jump back when a car swerves too close. It's the reason you can finish the phrase peanut butter and without pausing to think. System 1 doesn't calculate. It reacts. It's like a master storyteller who spins explanations in real time, whether or not those stories are accurate. If you see a stranger frown, System 1 may whisper, he must be angry. If you hear a confident voice, it may suggest, she must know what she's talking about. Fast, effortless, and often useful. Without System 1, we would freeze in every situation, unable to respond to the simplest challenges. The slow one. But then there's System 2. Unlike its restless partner, System 2 is lazy. It wakes only when necessary, like a judge reluctantly stepping into court. It comes alive when you multiply 17 quencher 24, when you try to parallel park for the first time, or when you carefully read a contract before signing. System 2 is deliberate, logical, and thorough. It can follow rules, weigh evidence, and override impulses. But it's expensive. Every time you use it, you feel the strain, concentration, effort, even physical fatigue. Think back to your first driving lessons. Every mirror check, every gear shift, every turn signal required conscious focus. That was System 2 in full control. But after years of practice, those actions became automatic. System 1 took over. That's efficiency, but it also opens the door to autopilot mistakes. How they work together. Most of the time, System 1 is in charge, and System 2 just nods along. System 1 generates impressions, feelings, and quick answers. System 2, instead of questioning them, usually just approves. It's like a fact-checker who has grown too lazy to check facts. Take the famous puzzle. A bat and a ball cost 1.1 ton. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? System 1 blurts out, 10 cents. It feels obvious, smooth, immediate. But it's wrong. If the ball cost 10 cents, The bat would cost $1.1, making the total $1.20. The correct answer is 5 cents. But unless System 2 wakes up and checks, most people never notice. This is how errors slip through. System 1 is fast but sloppy. System 2 is careful but lazy. Together they form a partnership that is both brilliant and dangerous. The hidden bias of autopilot. Why does System 2 so often surrender? Because thinking is exhausting. Every difficult decision burns energy. After long days of focus, your ability to resist impulses weakens. Psychologists call this decision fatigue. Consider judges deciding parole cases. Early in the morning, approval rates are high, but as hours pass and mental energy drains, judges fall back on the safe option, denial. It's not that they suddenly become stricter. It's that System 2 grows tired, leaving System 1 to push for the easy way out. The same happens in daily life. After tackling a demanding project, you may end up buying snacks you didn't need or putting off important chores. Your System 2 is exhausted, so your impulsive System 1 takes the wheel. The story they write about you. Perhaps the strangest thing about these two systems is how invisible they are. You never feel the handoff between them. You don't sense when System 1 is making a snap judgment or when System 2 is reluctantly stepping in. Instead, you experience a single seamless flow of thought and you believe it is all you. But much of what feels like reasoning is simply System 1's instant storytelling, rubber-stamped by System 2. We are not as rational as we think. We are narrators piecing together explanations after the fact. So when you say, "I decided," what you really mean is that two very different minds reached a compromise inside you. One fast, emotional, and automatic. The other slow, deliberate, and logical. The frightening part is that the lazy judge often trusts the impulsive storyteller without checking the evidence. Understanding these two systems is the first step to understanding yourself. Because every bias, every mistake, every illusion we will explore in the next acts, they all begin here in the silent partnership between the fast one and the slow one. Anchors. How the first number tricks you. Picture this. You spin a wheel with numbers on it. It's completely random. The arrow lands on 10. Then someone asks, how many countries in Africa are members of the United Nations? Now imagine another person spins the wheel, but their arrow lands on 65. They get the same question. Who gives the higher estimate? The answer is obvious. The person who saw 65. But here's the disturbing part. The wheel was rigged. The numbers were meaningless. And yet the random anchor pulled people's answers in its direction. This experiment, run by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, shows how vulnerable our minds are to anchoring. A number once introduced quietly drags every judgment closer to it, even when we know it's irrelevant. You may think, that's just in a lab, but anchors guide your life every day. When you walk into a store and see a jacket listed at $300 but marked down to $150, the $300 price tag plants the anchor. Suddenly, $150 feels like a bargain, even if the jacket's real market value is $80. Or think about negotiations. The first person to put a number on the table gains enormous power. Realtors often show buyers an overpriced house first. Why? Because once your mind accepts $800,000 as a reference point, the next house at $650,000 feels reasonable. Without realizing it, you are negotiating with the anchor, not with reality. Anchors don't just affect money. They shape how we see ourselves. If you're told that the average number of push-ups someone your age can do is 50 and you manage only 30, you may feel weak even if the real average is only 20. Anchors create standards, and we adjust to them automatically. Why does this happen? Because the brain is desperate for shortcuts. Faced with uncertainty, System 1 latches onto the first thing it sees and uses it as a guide. System 2 could correct it, but most of the time it doesn't bother. The anchor feels natural, so it slips through unchallenged. The scariest part is that anchors can work invisibly. You might hear a single number in passing, a salary figure, a statistic on the news, a guess from a friend, and days later, when asked for your own estimate, your mind drifts back toward it without you even noticing. So the next time you see a discount, hear a bold prediction, or face a negotiation, remember you are not comparing to reality. You are comparing to the anchor someone slipped into your mind. And that means the starting point may already be a trap. Availability. Why vivid memories trick you. Close your eyes for a moment and think about airplane crashes. The images that come to mind are probably terrifying: flaming wreckage on the news, screaming headlines, endless coverage. Now think about car accidents. Can you picture one? Probably not as easily, unless you've experienced one yourself. And yet the truth is brutal. Car accidents kill far more people than airplanes ever will. Statistically, driving is hundreds of times more dangerous than flying. But our brains don't calculate risk with statistics. They calculate with images. This is the availability heuristic, the tendency to judge how likely something is based on how easily we can recall examples. It explains why people fear shark attacks more than heart disease. Shark attacks make headlines. They stick in the mind, a vivid picture of blood in the water, a dramatic story retold at the beach. But heart disease, it kills quietly, one person at a time, with no spectacle, invisible, unreported, and therefore underestimated. The same bias plays out in politics and media. When a crime is heavily covered on television, people start to believe crime rates are rising, even if statistics show the opposite. One horrific event outweighs 1,000 silent facts. We confuse what is memorable with what is frequent. Kahneman and Tversky demonstrated this with a clever study. They asked people, in English, are there more words that start with the letter K or more words with K in the third position? Most people instantly thought of kangaroo, kitchen, king. Words beginning with K are easy to recall. Almost no one thought of words like acknowledge or pocket, where K is the third letter. And so people confidently gave the wrong answer. What feels easier to remember feels more common. But feeling is not fact. This heuristic is why investors panic when they see one company collapse spectacularly, but ignore the slow, steady erosion of value in others. It's why we overestimate the risk of terrorism but underestimate the everyday dangers of diet, smoking, or stress. Even personal life is shaped by it. If you recently heard about a divorce among your friends, you may suddenly feel that marriages around you are unstable, even if the actual rate hasn't changed. The brain pulls what is available in memory and presents it as reality. And here's the dangerous twist. Availability is emotional. The more shocking or vivid an event, the stronger it anchors in memory, and the more it shapes your perception of the world. Numbers rarely carry the same weight. That's why advertising doesn't show you statistics. It shows you a smiling family, a happy customer, or a dramatic transformation. One image, burned into memory, outweighs pages of data. We live in a world of infinite information, but our brains still rely on the shortcut of recall, and as long as we do, the vivid will always beat the probable. Heuristics and shortcuts. You've already seen how a simple number, like the first price tag or the first offer in a negotiation, can quietly anchor every judgment that follows. But numbers aren't the only traps. The mind also leans on memory, not the statistics in a book, but the vivid flashes that rise to the surface when you close your eyes. That's why people fear flying more than driving. One plane crash, repeated across headlines and television screens, burns itself into memory. The everyday toll of car accidents remains invisible. The shortcut here is obvious. If I can recall it easily, it must be common. And yet, this is a trick. Availability is not the same as reality, but the brain doesn't stop there. When faced with uncertainty, it takes yet another shortcut. It looks for resemblance. A man in a suit who speaks confidently feels like a lawyer, even when statistically he is far more likely to be a security guard. A young woman who is passionate about social justice sounds like an activist, even if she is in fact more likely to be a bank teller. This is the representativeness heuristic. We substitute the hard question, what is the actual probability, with an easier one, does this person fit the stereotype? It feels smooth, natural, almost irresistible, but it betrays us. Because probability doesn't care about stories. Probability cares about numbers. And when the story seduces us, we forget the math. That's why even trained people, even statisticians, fall into the conjunction fallacy, believing a detailed story, here's a bank teller who is also an activist, is more likely than the simple truth, here's a bank teller. The brain wants coherence more than accuracy. Anchors, memories, stereotypes, different shortcuts, but they share one pattern. They feel effortless, immediate, and convincing. They let System 1 deliver an answer before System 2 even wakes up. And once that answer feels right, System 2 often accepts it. The strangest thing is how quietly these shortcuts work. You don't notice the anchor tugging your thoughts. You don't feel the vivid memory pushing itself to the front of the line. You don't realize that a stereotype has slipped in to replace real probability. It all feels like thinking. But very often, what looks like reasoning is really substitution. The brain takes a difficult question, how happy am I with my life? And swaps it with an easier one. How do I feel right now? If you happen to be in a good mood, you report life satisfaction as high. If you're tired, frustrated, or hungry, you rate your life lower. The question hasn't been answered. It has been replaced. This is why weather can influence surveys of happiness. On a sunny day, people report greater satisfaction with their lives. On a rainy day, the opposite. Ask them if the weather affects their answer, and they'll deny it. System 1 doesn't announce its substitutions. It just delivers the feeling, and System 2 signs the form. Another shortcut is the halo effect. Meet someone who is physically attractive, and suddenly you assume they are kinder, smarter, more competent. One good impression spills over into every other judgment. The opposite also holds. A single flaw, a bad first impression, a small mistake can poison your view of an entire person. The halo effect doesn't only color how we see people. It spreads into politics, business, even our private lives. When a company launches one successful product, we expect all its products to be excellent. When a politician delivers one moving speech, we assume their policies must be wise. When a friend shows loyalty once, we may overlook signs of dishonesty later. Each shortcut feels efficient because it is efficient. These are tools of survival. In the ancient past, when you heard rustling in the bushes, you didn't stop to calculate probabilities. You substituted the hard question, what exactly is in there? With the easier one, does it sound dangerous? That speed could save your life. The halo effect, too, was useful in small tribes. Trusting someone who looked strong and healthy was often a good bet. But today, these same shortcuts lead us astray. The modern world is not a forest. It is a marketplace of information, filled with numbers, data, and complexity. And yet our brains still cling to the old tools. We repeat mistakes not because we lack intelligence, but because intelligence arrives too late. By the time System 2 wakes up, the shortcut has already written the story. Once a story forms in the mind, these shortcuts don't stop working. They begin reinforcing one another. A first impression shaped by the halo effect quickly becomes fuel for another bias, the need for confirmation. Confirmation bias is the mind's habit of searching for evidence that supports what it already believes, while ignoring everything that contradicts it. If you've decided a coworker is reliable, every on-time email and every completed task stands out in memory as proof. The times they disappointed you fade into the background. If you believe a politician is corrupt, every rumor and every slip of the tongue looks suspicious, even if nothing illegal happened. System 1 writes the story, and System 2 acts less like a judge and more like a lawyer, defending the case, not questioning it. Evidence is not weighed equally. It is cherry-picked. And the more confident we feel, the harder it is to see this bias at work. But perhaps the most dangerous shortcut is not confirmation, but framing. The way information is presented shapes decisions more than the information itself. Imagine a doctor tells you that a surgery has a 90% survival rate. You feel reassured. Now imagine the same doctor says the surgery has a 10% death rate. The numbers are identical, but the feelings are not. This is the framing effect. The brain reacts not to the facts, but to the emotional window through which the facts are delivered. A discount sounds exciting even if the price is unchanged. A tax relief feels different from a government subsidy, though they may describe the same policy. Framing seeps into everything. Advertisers frame choices to make products irresistible. Politicians frame debates to rally emotions. Even in your personal life, framing matters. Losing $50 feels worse than gaining $50 feels good, even though the arithmetic is neutral. These shortcuts are not small quirks. They are the architecture of daily life. They determine who you trust, what you buy, how you vote, and even how you explain your own happiness. Anchors pull you toward false baselines. Availability tricks you with vivid memories. Representativeness seduces you with stereotypes. Substitution swaps hard questions for easy ones. The halo effect clouds your judgment. Confirmation bias blinds you, and framing quietly reshapes your world. We like to think we make choices consciously, but most of the time, the choice is already halfway decided before we pause to think. The unsettling truth is that these shortcuts are not mistakes in the sense of broken machinery. They are features of the mind. They evolved to help us survive in a world of quick decisions and scarce information. In the forest, they kept us alive. In the marketplace, they keep us moving. But in the modern world of statistics, finance, science, and politics, they become traps, and here is the deeper danger. Knowing about them does not make us immune. Even after learning about anchors, you will still be pulled by the first number you hear. Even after hearing of availability, the next shocking headline will still feel like a sign of a bigger trend. Knowledge does not erase bias. It only gives you the faint chance of noticing when it happens. This is why Kahneman once warned that awareness may slow the illusion, but it rarely removes it. To live with heuristics is to live with a constant negotiation between two selves, one that wants speed and one that demands accuracy. But most of the time, the quick self wins. And once it wins, it produces another illusion, perhaps the most dangerous one of all, the illusion that we were right to begin with. We anchor, we substitute, we frame, we stereotype, and then we walk away with confidence. It is this confidence, born out of shaky foundations, that shapes decisions far larger than shopping lists or survey questions. It drives business leaders to gamble, judges to overestimate, politicians to predict, and investors to risk everything. And so after the shortcuts comes the trap that feels even harder to escape: overconfidence. The belief not only that we know, but that we know more than we do. The comfort of certainty. We've seen how the brain leans on shortcuts, anchors, memories, stereotypes, frames. Each one bends perception. But the most dangerous distortion isn't in how we judge the world. It's in how certain we feel after the judgment is made. That certainty has a name: overconfidence. It begins with a simple illusion: the belief that our knowledge is more complete than it really is. Think about the last time you gave someone directions. You probably pointed the way with confidence, even if you weren't entirely sure of the street names. Or recall the last time you estimated how long a project would take. Did you underestimate? Almost everyone does. Psychologists call it the planning fallacy. We imagine best-case scenarios, forget the delays, the errors, the unexpected interruptions, and yet we state our guesses with conviction. Why? Because the brain dislikes uncertainty. Gaps in knowledge make us anxious. To soothe that discomfort, System 1 rushes to create a story: smooth, coherent, convincing. System 2, instead of questioning, approves. The result is not just a guess, but a guess that feels solid, even inevitable. This is why financial markets are littered with failed predictions. Analysts speak with confidence about the rise or fall of currencies, stocks, or commodities. Some predictions happen to be right. Many are wrong. But what the public remembers is not the accuracy, but the tone, the confident voice that sounded certain. Confidence persuades more than correctness. One famous study asked people to answer trivia questions and then rate how sure they were of their answers. Again and again, confidence exceeded accuracy. People who claimed to be 90% sure were often right only 70% of the time. The gap between how much we think we know and how much we actually know is the very definition of overconfidence. But here is the subtle danger. Overconfidence doesn't just fool others, it fools ourselves. We look back on past events and see them as more predictable than they were. The stock market crashes and we say, "I knew it all along." A relationship ends and we insist, "The signs were always there." Hindsight reshapes memory, editing out the uncertainty we once felt. And so, step by step, life convinces us that we are wiser than we are, more prepared than we are, more certain than reality allows. The illusion of prediction. If overconfidence were only about small errors, misjudging the time for a project, or giving directions with a shaky memory, it would be harmless. But the illusion scales upward. It infects boardrooms, courtrooms, governments, and entire economies. Take the world of finance. In the 1980s and 1990s, investment firms filled with highly trained analysts built models to predict the future of markets. They spoke with absolute certainty, armed with graphs, statistics, and jargon. And yet, year after year, study after study, the evidence showed the same pattern. Professional stock pickers performed little better than chance. Hedge fund managers, economists, central bankers, all of them projected confidence. Few consistently outperformed a simple index fund, and still they were believed. Why? Because confidence is magnetic. A trader who hesitates is ignored. A forecaster who says perhaps or it depends gets no airtime. But the one who says the market will rise by 15% this year gets invited back on television. Certainty sells. The illusion of prediction spreads far beyond finance. Think of political forecasts. Before major elections, pundits explain with conviction why one candidate will triumph. After the result, those same pundits explain, with equal conviction, why the outcome was inevitable, even if it was the opposite of what they predicted. Their certainty remains intact, as if memory itself rewrote the past to protect their reputation. Psychologists call this the hindsight bias, the tendency to believe, after an event, that we knew it all along. It's a trick of memory that feeds the machine of overconfidence. We forget the doubts we once had. We remember the story as if it was always clear. And so we feel wiser than we are. Kahneman once described prediction as being like driving through the fog with the rearview mirror. You see the road behind you perfectly. You see the road ahead dimly, barely at all. But because the past looks so clear, you convince yourself that the future must be clear too. And so you drive faster than you should. The tragic irony is that experience often makes this worse, not better. A forecaster who got lucky once or twice may mistake luck for skill. A manager who guessed correctly in one crisis assumes he has insight into the next. A general who won one war plans the next one as if the world hasn't changed. Each success builds the illusion that the future is predictable until the next shock proves it isn't. And when the shock comes, we don't admit surprise. We rewrite the story, telling ourselves it was obvious. In doing so, we feed the cycle. I was right before. I must be right again. Overconfidence is not just a bias. It is a feedback loop, a self-reinforcing illusion that grows stronger with every retelling of our own history. The cost of overconfidence. Overconfidence might sound like a private flaw, something that causes an individual to make poor choices, but in reality, it can ripple outward, shaping entire societies. Consider the 2008 financial crisis. For years, banks and investors believed that housing prices would keep rising. Risk models built by experts with advanced degrees gave comforting probabilities. The chance of a nationwide housing collapse was near zero. Ratings agencies stamped risky securities with AAA labels. Politicians spoke of a new era of stability. The belief was not just that profits would continue, but that the system itself was safe. It was the ultimate form of overconfidence, the illusion of control in a world driven by uncertainty. When the collapse came, it wiped out trillions of dollars, cost millions of people their homes and jobs, and triggered a global recession. The models had been wrong. The experts had been wrong. But their confidence had been absolute. History is full of such lessons. Military strategy provides another. In 1914, European leaders entered what they thought would be a quick conflict. The war will be over by Christmas. Instead, World War I dragged on for 4 years, killing millions. Each side had been certain of victory, certain that their plans, their alliances, their technology guaranteed success. Overconfidence turned what could have been a regional conflict into a global catastrophe. Even in everyday life, the costs of overconfidence show themselves. A CEO launches an ambitious merger, convinced it will be a success because past deals worked out. But the culture clashes, synergies never appear, and billions are lost. A startup founder raises money on the promise of rapid growth, only to discover that scaling a business is harder than pitching it. A surgeon pushes ahead with a risky procedure, confident in skill but blind to the odds. The common thread is this: confidence persuades others as well. Investors trust the CEO who sounds sure. Citizens trust the politician who declares certainty. Teams follow leaders who radiate conviction. The more persuasive the confidence, the more catastrophic the error when reality refuses to cooperate. And still, the lesson is rarely learned. Because after the failure, the story is rewritten. The financial collapse, a black swan, the lost war. A result of unforeseeable mistakes. The failed merger, market conditions, not the plan itself. Each explanation protects the illusion. We were right, but the world betrayed us. The cost of overconfidence is not just measured in money, power, or even lives. It is measured in missed humility, the lost chance to admit uncertainty, to proceed with caution, to question the story before acting on it. And as long as we equate confidence with competence, we will keep paying that price. Why confidence persuades more than truth? There's a paradox at the heart of human psychology. The more confident someone sounds, the more we tend to believe them, even if they're wrong. You've seen it in classrooms. The student who raises a hand quickly, speaking with conviction, is assumed to be smarter than the quiet one who hesitates. In offices, the manager who speaks firmly is treated as competent, even if the data is shaky. On television, pundits who deliver sharp, definitive answers dominate the airtime, while cautious voices are drowned out. Why do we fall for this? Because certainty feels safe. When someone projects doubt, we sense risk. But when someone projects confidence, we sense control. Our brains evolved in environments where leaders who acted decisively could mean the difference between survival and chaos. Hesitation was dangerous. Conviction was reassuring. But conviction and accuracy are not the same. A person can be completely wrong and completely certain at the same time. In fact, those two qualities often go together. The less someone truly knows, the fewer doubts they have, and the louder their voice becomes. Psychologists call this the Dunning-Kruger effect. The less skilled you are at a task, the more likely you are to overestimate your ability. Meanwhile, those who are genuinely skilled see all the complications, the uncertainties, the hidden variables. They speak more cautiously and are mistaken for being less competent. This creates a dangerous feedback loop. The public rewards certainty. The confident get promoted, published, and elected. Their voices shape policy, investment, and opinion. But their certainty was never proof of truth. It was only proof of boldness. And yet, even knowing this, we can't help but be drawn in. We want the world to be simpler than it is. We want answers to be clear, predictions to be reliable, leaders to be sure, confidence scratches that itch. Truth, with its complexity and hesitation, feels unsatisfying. This explains why, in surveys, people often prefer the doctor who says, "I know exactly what the problem is," over the one who says, "There are 3 possibilities, and we need more tests." The second doctor is closer to the truth, but the first doctor feels safer. And so again and again, we choose the confident voice. We follow it, we reward it. And in doing so, we give overconfidence more power than truth itself. The feedback loop we rarely escape. Daniel Kahneman once called overconfidence the most dangerous bias of them all. Not because it makes us careless once, but because it convinces us we were never wrong to begin with. Think about that. Anchors, availability, stereotypes, all of them can be spotted, at least sometimes, if you know what to look for. But overconfidence hides in the story we tell ourselves afterward. It edits memory. It erases doubt. It convinces us that we saw the path clearly, even when we stumbled in the dark. This is why experts keep making bold predictions, why leaders keep marching into disasters, why investors keep chasing bubbles. Each mistake could have been a lesson. But instead, hindsight turns it into a triumph of foresight. I knew it all along. The story protects the illusion, and the illusion protects the story. In Kahneman's research, he found that even when people were shown data proving their predictions were no better than chance, they didn't stop predicting. They didn't even lower their confidence. They simply adjusted the story. Perhaps the data was flawed. Perhaps the conditions had changed. The prediction was not wrong. It was merely unlucky. This is the feedback loop of overconfidence. Success breeds certainty. Certainty blinds us to luck. Luck disguises itself as skill, and the next decision is made with even greater confidence than the last, until failure comes. And when it does, the story is rewritten again, preserving the illusion. Overconfidence is not just an error of judgment. It is a defense mechanism. It protects the ego from uncertainty. It shields the mind from the unbearable thought. I don't know as much as I think I do, but the cost is high. Because when confidence becomes a substitute for accuracy, decisions drift further from reality. And the world, markets, politics, war, even daily life punishes arrogance more than hesitation. Kahneman's warning was not that we can eliminate overconfidence. We can't. It is stitched into the way the brain seeks coherence. His warning was that we must remain suspicious of certainty itself. When a story feels too smooth, too inevitable, too obvious, that is the moment to pause. That is the moment to ask, am I seeing clearly, or am I only convinced because the feeling is comfortable? And so the lesson of overconfidence is the same as the lesson of every shortcut we've explored. The brain is a brilliant storyteller, but not always a truthful one. If you want to think slowly, deliberately, rationally, you must first doubt the story that feels most certain. Because certainty is not knowledge. Certainty is only confidence. And the two are not the same. Why we hate to lose. If you want to see System 1 at its most powerful, don't ask it to solve a puzzle. Don't test it with illusions. Put it in front of a loss. Because nothing jolts the fast system awake like the prospect of losing something we already have. Kahneman and his colleague Amos Tversky discovered this truth through countless experiments. They asked people to make simple choices framed in terms of gains and losses. When a choice promised a certain gain, most people became cautious. They preferred a guaranteed $100 over a 50% chance to win $250, even though the gamble was worth more on average. But when the same choice was framed as a loss, the pattern flipped. People would rather gamble than accept a guaranteed loss. Losing $100 hurt so badly that they risked losing $250 just to avoid it. The conclusion was stark. Losses loom larger than gains. System 1 treats a loss as an emergency. It floods us with emotion, pushing us to fight, to gamble, to cling to what's slipping away. System 2 could step in and calculate the expected value, the long-term odds. But more often, System 2 is overrun. It doesn't like the feeling of loss either. It doesn't want to spend the effort resisting the story. System 1 is shouting, "Don't let go. Don't give up. Fight for it." This is why investors cling to losing stocks, refusing to sell, waiting for a rebound that may never come. Selling means locking in the loss. It feels like pain, shame, failure. So they hold on, often until the loss grows even bigger. It's why people drive across town to save $10 on a small purchase, but don't notice when they overpay thousands on a house or a car. The relative size doesn't matter. The brain zooms in on the immediate sting. I could have lost that money. Loss aversion seeps into relationships, careers, politics. Once we own something, an object, a belief, even an identity, System 1 marks it as part of us, and letting go feels like losing part of ourselves. Kahneman captured it in one elegant phrase: losses loom larger than gains. It's not just a bias, it's a law of the mind, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Prospect theory and loss aversion. Imagine you are a doctor. A deadly disease has broken out, threatening 600 people. 2 treatments are available. Treatment A will save 200 people for sure. Treatment B has a 1/3 chance of saving all 600 and a 2/3 chance of saving none. Most people, when asked, choose treatment A. The certainty of saving 200 lives feels safer, more comforting. System 1 leans toward the sure gain. But now imagine the same scenario described differently. Treatment A will result in 400 people dying. Treatment B has a 1/3 chance that nobody will die and a 2/3 chance that everyone will. Suddenly, the majority choose treatment B. Faced with a loss, System 1 pushes us toward the gamble, even though the numbers are identical. This is the framing effect. System 1 doesn't weigh probabilities the way System 2 can. It reacts to the story, the emotional frame. The words "lives saved" trigger safety. The words "people dying" trigger fear, and fear makes us risk-seeking. Kahneman and Tversky realized that the same problem described in different language could flip decisions entirely. System 1 is not analyzing data. It is reacting to feelings. System 2 could notice that the math hasn't changed, but unless it wakes up and insists on checking, the decision follows the emotional path carved by words. This explains why advertising focuses less on features and more on framing. A product is not 90% fat-free. It is healthy. A sale is not a return to fair value. It is 50% off. Politicians do the same. One side speaks of tax relief, the other of tax fairness. Each phrase is designed to push System 1 in a direction long before System 2 starts counting. What makes framing powerful is that we rarely notice it. We believe we're reacting to facts, but we're reacting to the lens placed in front of them. 2 identical realities, 2 different frames, and System 1 makes 2 opposite choices. Loss aversion already ensures that losses feel heavier than gains, but framing magnifies the effect. By choosing words carefully, others can make your System 1 feel that a situation is safe or dangerous, hopeful or hopeless. And once the feeling takes hold, it is hard for System 2 to fight back. The world we inhabit is not just built of numbers and outcomes. It is built of frames, and whoever controls the frame controls the decision. The endowment effect: why we overvalue what we already have. There's a curious experiment that Kahneman loved to repeat. Half the people in a room are given a coffee mug. The other half are given nothing. After a few minutes, the groups are asked to trade. The mug owners can set a selling price. The empty-handed can offer to buy. If humans were perfectly rational, the prices should match. After all, it's just a mug. But that's not what happens. Sellers demand far more than buyers are willing to pay, often twice as much. Why? Because the moment you own something, it stops being a mug. It becomes your mug. Letting go feels like losing, and loss feels worse than gain feels good. This is called the endowment effect, the tendency to overvalue what we already possess, and it stretches far beyond coffee mugs. Think about your closet. How many shirts or jackets have you kept for years, even though you never wear them? Selling them or giving them away feels like a loss, even though logically you'd be better off freeing space, or consider houses. Homeowners routinely overprice their properties when selling because to them, every scratch on the wall, every memory in the kitchen is part of the value. Buyers don't see those things, but sellers can't help themselves. The endowment effect also explains why people hold on to bad investments. A stock they bought for $100 feels like it's worth $100 forever. Selling at $80 feels like a loss, so they wait, hoping it climbs back. But hope is not strategy, and losses deepen. Even relationships fall prey to this. Once something is ours, a job, a city, a partner, the act of leaving feels like surrender. We tell ourselves stories to justify staying. It's not so bad. Things might change. I've already invested so much. But what we're really protecting is not the job or the relationship. It's the pain of admitting loss. The endowment effect reveals how sticky ownership is. The moment we take possession, System 1 stamps the object as part of our identity. Giving it up is not just about losing money or utility. It feels like losing a piece of ourselves. And so we cling to mugs, to shirts, to houses, to stocks, to people, all because the mind whispers, better to hold on than to face the pain of letting go. Why loss aversion shapes entire societies. Loss aversion is not just a private quirk. When multiplied across millions of minds, it becomes one of the strongest forces in economics, politics, and culture. Take taxes. People protest loudly when a government raises taxes, but they rarely celebrate when taxes are lowered by the same amount. A gain feels light. A loss feels heavy. Politicians know this. That's why they frame policy changes as avoiding losses. We must act, or jobs will vanish. We must reform, or the economy will collapse. Fear of loss motivates action far more effectively than hope of gain, or consider wars. Nations often escalate conflicts, not because victory is certain, but because admitting defeat feels unbearable. Leaders fear the loss of territory, the loss of prestige, the loss of face. So they gamble, pouring more resources into unwinnable battles, chasing the illusion that yesterday's losses can be redeemed tomorrow. History is littered with wars prolonged not by strategy, but by the refusal to accept loss. Even in business, the effect is visible. Companies cling to failing products because abandoning them would mean writing off sunk costs. Managers pour money into projects that everyone knows are doomed because canceling feels like admitting failure. Economists call it the sunk cost fallacy, but at its heart, it is simply loss aversion on a corporate scale. And it doesn't stop there. Loss aversion shapes culture itself. Think about traditions. Families hold on to rituals. Organizations cling to outdated rules. Societies resist change, not always because the old ways are better, but because giving them up feels like losing part of their identity. Better to keep the familiar, even if imperfect, than to suffer the pain of letting go. Kahneman showed that this bias is not random. It is systematic, predictable, and universal. Humans everywhere are more sensitive to losses than to gains. It is a lens that bends every decision, from the way we shop to the way we govern. The irony is that this fear of loss, which once protected our ancestors from real dangers, now chains us to illusions. We cling to bad investments, broken relationships, failing policies, all to avoid a feeling that exists only in the mind. And yet, perhaps the saddest truth is this: knowing about loss aversion doesn't free us from it. You can remind yourself that $100 loss and a $100 gain should weigh the same. You can repeat that the math is neutral, but when the moment comes, when it's your money, your status, your pride on the line, the loss still stings twice as much. Loss aversion is the gravity of the mind. You can fight against it, but you will always feel its pull, and unless you learn to recognize that pull, you will keep orbiting the same mistakes. The two voices of happiness. Imagine you're at a concert. The music is beautiful, the atmosphere electric, and for 2 hours you are swept away. Then, in the final minute, the sound system fails with a loud screech. People cover their ears, some laugh nervously, others leave annoyed. Now, how was the concert? If you judge by the hours of joy, it was wonderful. But when most people describe it afterward, they focus on the ending. The last moment overshadows the whole. What you experienced is not the same as what you remember. This is Kahneman's unsettling idea. Each of us has not one self, but two. The experiencing self, which lives moment to moment, feeling each second as it passes, and the remembering self, which looks back, edits the story, and decides what it all meant. The experiencing self would say, "For nearly 2 hours, I was happy." The remembering self says, "The concert was ruined." And in the end, it's the remembering self that tells the story, to others and to yourself. This divide shows up in unexpected ways. Patients undergoing painful medical procedures reported their suffering minute by minute. Later, when asked to recall how painful it was, their memories didn't match the total amount of pain they felt. Instead, their judgments depended mostly on the peak of pain and how the experience ended. A long procedure with moderate discomfort, but a gentle ending was remembered as less painful than a shorter, sharper one that ended badly. This is called the peak end rule. The remembering self doesn't care about every detail. It highlights the worst moment and the final moment, then discards the rest. Why does this matter? Because the remembering self is the one that makes decisions. When you choose whether to return to a vacation spot, to try a restaurant again, to undergo another medical procedure, you don't consult the experiencing self. You consult the story that memory has written, and memory is biased. This means your happiness is not just about what you live through, it's about how you later recall it. A life full of pleasant moments, but with bad endings, may be remembered as worse than a life with many struggles but satisfying conclusions. Two selves, one that feels, one that remembers, and they don't always agree. Why the remembering self controls our choices. Think back to the last vacation you took. Maybe it was at the beach or a city you'd always wanted to visit. While you were there, the experiencing self was in charge. It felt the sun on your skin, tasted the food, listened to the noise of the streets or the silence of the waves. Moment to moment, it was simply living. But later, when you tell a friend about the trip, you don't list every moment. You don't describe each breakfast or every quiet evening. Instead, you pick highlights. The most beautiful sunset, the funniest disaster, the worst hotel room, the one breathtaking sight. And in retelling, you create a story. That story becomes the trip. Here's the strange part. When you decide whether to go back to the same place again, it's not the experiencing self that makes the decision. It doesn't get a vote. The remembering self chooses, and it chooses based not on how you felt during the days, but on the edited story it has stored. Kahneman gives a haunting example. Imagine a vacation where you had wonderful days, laughter, rest, discovery, but at the end, all your photos and memories are erased, and you will forget everything the moment you return home. Would you still choose to go? Most people hesitate. Why spend time on happiness that will vanish? That hesitation reveals a truth. We live not only for experience, but for memory. The remembering self is the one that writes your autobiography, the one that tells you whether your life is good. It judges not by the sum of moments, but by peaks and endings, by stories that make sense. The experiencing self might have been happy for years, but if the remembering self decides the ending was bitter, it calls the whole story unhappy. This is why someone can live decades in a stable relationship and still call it a waste if it ends badly. It's why people say a career was ruined by one mistake, or that childhood was terrible because of a few sharp memories, even if many days were calm or joyful. The remembering self has authority. It does not report, it rewrites. And once it rewrites, the experiencing self's moments are gone. The unsettling truth is this: the self that lives your life is not the self that decides what your life means. The tyranny of memory. There's a cruel irony at the heart of the human mind. The self that lives life quietly, second by second, is powerless, and the self that remembers, the storyteller, is ruthless. It does not preserve experiences. It edits them, reshapes them, and sometimes discards them entirely. Consider pain. In studies where patients rated their discomfort minute by minute, researchers could graph the true arc of their suffering. Some endured long stretches of mild but steady pain. Others had shorter, sharper procedures. But when asked later, their memories told a different story. What mattered wasn't the total sum of suffering, it was the single worst moment and the way it ended. A long, grueling procedure that finished gently was remembered as not so bad. A shorter one with a brutal ending was remembered as terrible. This is the tyranny of memory. The lived reality disappears. The remembering self keeps only fragments, then builds a judgment from those fragments, and that judgment becomes the truth you carry. Think of relationships. Years of calm companionship can be erased in memory if the final months are bitter. Think of careers. A lifetime of competence can be overshadowed by one public failure. Memory doesn't play fair. It doesn't give each day equal weight. It crowns a few peaks, condemns a few endings, and calls that the story. The danger is not just that memory distorts, it's that it governs choices. You don't decide where to travel, whom to love, or what to pursue based on how your experiencing self felt, moment to moment. You decide based on the remembered story. And if the story is skewed, the future you choose may have little to do with the life you actually enjoyed. This explains why people chase experiences that photograph well, even if they weren't particularly pleasant. Why a vacation can feel exhausting in the moment, but later be declared the best trip ever because the photos and final memory glow. The remembering self is curating an image, not reporting reality. Kahneman once described it bluntly: what we get to keep from our experiences is a story. That story might betray the truth of what was lived, but it is the currency our minds trade in. And so the experiencing self is left unheard, and the remembering self rules, not by honesty, but by narrative power. The pursuit of happiness. What does it mean to be happy? It seems like a simple question. Yet when psychologists ask, the answers split in two. If you ask people to record their feelings throughout the day, in the middle of breakfast, during a commute, at work, at home, you get a portrait of the experiencing self. Happiness here is measured in real time. Did you enjoy that meal? Did traffic frustrate you? Did a conversation lift your mood? It is momentary, fragile, and constantly shifting. But ask the same people at the end of the week, how happy are you with your life? And you get a different picture. This is the remembering self, summing up days and months, highlighting milestones, ignoring the countless ordinary hours. It speaks not of fleeting moments, but of an overarching story. And here lies the paradox. The self that remembers is the one we consult when we think about happiness. We choose jobs, partners, vacations, even entire life paths, not based on the flow of daily well-being, but on the story we expect to tell later. Think of a vacation again. During the trip, you may have been hot, tired, jet-lagged, even sick. The experiencing self struggled, but the remembering self doesn't care about the exhaustion. It holds on to the photo of the mountain at sunset, the one perfect dinner, the final toast on the last night. That becomes the story. It was wonderful. Or consider a marathon runner. The hours of training, the blisters, the final miles of agony, in the moment, the experiencing self suffers. But later, the remembering self tells a different tale. It was one of the best achievements of my life. This is why people chase challenges, even suffering, as long as they come with a strong ending and a story worth telling. We don't live only for comfort. We live for meaning, and meaning belongs to memory. But there is danger in this, because the remembering self can trick us into chasing goals that look good in the story, but may not make life enjoyable day by day. Someone might sacrifice decades to a career, enduring stress and unhappiness, all to craft a narrative of success. Someone else might stay in a relationship that drains them just to preserve a storyline of loyalty. We are storytellers first, experiencers second, and often we sacrifice the quiet happiness of living for the dramatic arc of remembering. The tragedy, as Kahneman pointed out, is that we don't choose between experiences, we choose between memories of experiences. And that means the self that lives is often betrayed by the self that remembers. Which self should we trust? The experiencing self lives every moment. It wakes up with you in the morning, tastes the first sip of coffee, feels the warmth of the shower, the irritation of traffic, the comfort of home. It is fragile, fleeting, endlessly replaced by the next moment, and then it vanishes. Unless the remembering self decides to keep it, the experience disappears forever. The remembering self, by contrast, is ruthless. It doesn't care about the thousands of ordinary seconds. It keeps only fragments, the highs, the lows, the endings, and weaves them into a narrative. It is not faithful to reality, but it is powerful. It is the one that decides, was that a good concert? Was that a good vacation? Was that a good life? So which self should we trust? If happiness means comfort in the present, then the experiencing self should rule. A life of simple pleasures, good meals, peaceful routines, gentle relationships would be a good life. But if happiness means a story worth telling, then the remembering self is king. A life of struggle, achievement, even pain might be declared meaningful, because the story ends well. Kahneman put it starkly: we face a conflict between two selves, and they want different things. The experiencing self wants peace. The remembering self wants meaning. One seeks to minimize pain in the moment. The other seeks to maximize pride in the narrative, and they cannot both always be satisfied. This conflict runs through our choices. Do we choose the job that will give us daily satisfaction, or the one that will look impressive in memory? Do we take the comfortable vacation or the difficult trip that will produce better stories? Do we build a life we enjoy living, or a life we will later remember fondly? There is no easy answer. But the unsettling truth is this: the remembering self almost always wins. It writes the story. It casts the vote. It is the one that decides for your future. And so, most of us live less for the moments themselves and more for the narrative they leave behind. The self that lives your life is not the one that judges it. The self that feels happiness is not the one that demands meaning, and the gap between them, that silent conflict, may be the deepest paradox of the human mind. For a long time, people believed that human beings were creatures of reason. Philosophers imagined us as rational actors, carefully weighing evidence, calmly calculating choices, steering life with logic. Economists built entire theories on the figure of the rational man who maximizes gains and minimizes losses. It was a comforting picture, but the evidence paints something far stranger. What we've discovered is not a flawless calculator, but a mind full of shortcuts. We anchor on the first number we see, no matter how meaningless it is. We mistake vivid stories for reality, believing the world is dangerous or safe, depending on what comes easiest to recall. We stereotype instead of calculating probabilities. We cling to what we own, as if letting go were losing part of ourselves. We rewrite experiences so that memory tells a simpler story than the life we actually lived. And again, we trust confidence more than truth, mistaking certainty for knowledge. This does not mean the mind is broken. It means the mind is built for something different than pure accuracy. It is built for survival, for speed, for stories that make the world coherent enough to act in. Without those illusions, we would drown in complexity. With them, we can move forward, but we also pay the price. The price is that we are never as rational as we think. Our freedom is more fragile than we imagine. The way a choice is framed can change everything. A single word, a single number, a single image can tip us one way or another without us noticing. We like to believe we are steering the ship, but often it is the current of biases carrying us along. And then comes the deepest paradox. The life we live is not the same as the life we remember. The self that experiences each moment is not the one that decides whether it was worthwhile. We chase vacations not for the peace of the days, but for the photos and the story they will become. We suffer through challenges not because they bring comfort, but because they bring meaning in hindsight. The remembering self writes the autobiography, and the experiencing self has no voice. So which self should we serve? The one that wants comfort in the present, or the one that wants pride in the story? There is no simple answer. And maybe that is the tragedy or the beauty of being human. We are not designed to maximize happiness. We are designed to chase meaning, even at the cost of comfort. Kahneman himself admitted he was not immune to these illusions. Decades of studying them did not make him free. And that, perhaps, is the final lesson. Awareness is not immunity. Knowing about bias does not erase it, but it gives us one gift, the gift of humility. The ability to pause when certainty feels too strong, to question the story that feels too neat, to doubt the confidence that feels too smooth. In a world that rewards certainty, humility can feel weak. But in truth, it is the highest form of wisdom. Because certainty is not knowledge, confidence is not truth, and the stories memory tells are not the same as the lives we actually lived. What Kahneman gave us was not a map to perfect reason, but a mirror. A mirror that shows us as we really are, brilliant, flawed, impulsive, biased, endlessly storytelling creatures. To look into that mirror is uncomfortable, but it is also liberating because once you see the illusions, you cannot unsee them. You begin to notice the anchors, the frames, the way memory edits, the way confidence seduces. You begin to catch yourself in the act of being human. We will never escape fast thinking. We will never silence the shortcuts. But perhaps that is not the point. Perhaps the point is to live with them wisely, to doubt when the story feels too smooth, to pause when confidence feels too strong, to remember that the mind is not built for truth, but for coherence, and that coherence is not the same as reality. And maybe that is what it really means to think slowly.